In this video, we will be assembling the Brinly 54-inch lawn sweeper model LS2-54-BH-G for use with riding mowers and lawn tractors. Tools required: 2 1/2-inch wrench or sockets, 1 7/16-inch wrench or socket, a short handle flathead screwdriver, 2 9/16-inch wrench or sockets, channel locks or pliers, and scissors. Preparation tip: shift the lower pivot bar forward. Place one hand on the brush housing and the other on the pivot bar and lower the pivot bar down to move the wheels away from the brush housing. This will help with step 1. Step 1. Attaching the tow bars. Align the holes in one of the tow bars up with the holes in the brush housing and use the hardware from panel 1 to attach the tow bars to the frame. Pass 2 5/16-inch by 1.5-inch carriage bolts from below through both pieces and add a 5/16-inch washer and nylon lock nut to the end of each bolt to hold the bar in place. But do not fully tighten just yet. Then pass a third bolt through the square hole in the side extension and the side hole in the middle of the tow bar and add a washer and a lock nut to hold the tow bar in place. But do not fully tighten just yet. Repeat this step on the other side by aligning the holes in the other tow bar up with the holes in the housing with the bend facing forward, and from below passing 2 5/16-inch by 1/2-inch bolts through both pieces and adding a 5/16-inch washer and lock nut to the ends of both bolts to keep the bar in place. And pass a third bolt through the square hole in the side extension and the side hole in the middle of the tow bar. Add a washer and lock nut to hold the tow bar in place. But do not fully tighten just yet. Step 2. Hitch plate measurement. To determine the proper clevis orientation, measure the distance from the ground to your hitch. In this video, we will be assembling for a hitch point 9 inches from the ground. Step 3. Adding the clevis. Note, for hitch heights higher than 10 inches, the clevis plate should be flipped so the cotter pin extension is at the top. For our 9-inch hitch, we will orient the clevis extension to the bottom and use the third set of holes from the top. Place the clevis between the ends of the tow bars and, using the hardware in panel 2, pass the 2 5/16-inch by 2 3/4-inch bolts through the tow bars and the clevis holes that correspond to your hitch height, and add 5/16-inch nylon lock nuts to the ends of each of the bolts to hold the clevis in place. Hand tightening only for now. Then pass the third bolt through one tow bar and add the spacer to the bolt in between the bars before passing it through the second tow bar and adding a 5/16-inch nylon lock nut to the end. Step 4. Adding the hitch pin. Now tighten all of the hardware from step 1 and step 3 using a 1/2-inch wrench and socket, securing each of the tow bars to the housing on both sides and fully tightening the bolts connecting the tow bars to each other, securing the clevis plate in place. Then add the hitch pin from panel 3 in the skin pack by passing it through the hole in the end of the clevis extension and adding the hairpin cotter to keep the hitch pin in place. Step 5. Adding the height adjustment handle. Add the 5/16-inch by 3/4-inch bolt to the lower small hole in the handle and loosely add the 5/16-inch nylon lock nut. Then rest the inside of the bolt into the groove in the lower pivot bar. The end of the pivot bar should pass through the larger hole before tightening the bolt fully using a 1/2-inch wrench and socket. Step 6. Adding the lock arm. Add a washer to the 5/16-inch by 2.5-inch bolt and pass the bolt through the middle hole in the left tow bar. Add a washer, a lock washer, and a 5/16-inch hex nut. And using a 1/2-inch socket extender, tighten the nut all of the way against the tow bar. Then add a washer and the lock arm to the end of the bolt. And on the other side of the lock arm, add one more washer and a 5/16-inch lock nut. Tighten the lock nut using a 1/2-inch socket, but do not over tighten. Finally, slide the vinyl bolt cap over the end of the bolt. The lift arm should be able to pivot freely. Step 7. Adding the height adjustment knob. Using the hardware in panel 6, attach the height adjustment handle to the lock arm by passing the 5/16-inch by 1 1/4-inch bolt from the inside through the lift handle and groove in the lock arm. Then add the large washer and the star lock washer to the end of the bolt before adding the knob, threading it all of the way down the bolt. Then attach the red vinyl grips from panel 6 to the ends of both pieces. Step 8. Adding the symmetrical bolt. Using the hardware in panel 7, add the identical bolt and hardware to the hole in the frame on the other side by adding a washer to the end, passing it through the frame, adding another washer, a 5/16" lock washer, and a 5/16" hex nut. Tightening the nut all of the way down to the frame, and then add the vinyl bolt cap. Note, these pieces can be used as spare parts and are placed here for visual symmetry. Step 9. Assembling the hamper frame. Note, the lower hamper frame has a single bend towards the end, and the upper hamper tubes have a bend at the very end with a slightly angled bend more towards the middle. Insert the round, tapered end of both lower hamper frames into the end of one of the center frame bars, and pass the 1/4" plastic plugs through the holes in both pieces to secure the lower hamper frames in place. And then place the U shape in the back of the center of the hamper with the flat extensions of the tubes angled upwards. Then, going slowly and using caution not to tear the hamper, pass the center tube through the long openings in the top of the hamper and slowly work the bent end from the opening at the far end of the left side of the hamper, past the center hole and out the other end of the right side of the hamper. Then attach the 2 angled frame bars by passing the round end of the frame through the sleeves in the side of the hamper and inserting the tapered end into the center bar. Repeat this step on the other side, sliding the round end of the frame through the sleeves in the side of the hamper and inserting the tapered end into the center bar. Then be sure to secure the frame together by passing the 2 pine tree clips from the bottom through the holes in both pieces. Step 10. Adding the hamper stop rod. Using the hardware in panel 10, thread 1 3/8" nut onto each end of the hamper stop rod until they are approximately in the center of the threads. Then place the hamper stop rod through the holes in the upper and lower side tubes. Step 11. Securing the hamper stop rod. Add a 3/8" lock nut onto each end of the hamper stop rod and using a 9/16" wrench, tighten the inner nut towards the frame. And holding the hamper stop rod with pliers or channel locks, tighten the outer lock nut against the frame, but do not over-tighten. Step 12. Securing the bottom of the hamper. Now pull up the hamper from the bottom and hook the long J channel onto the hamper stop rod and take the side flaps of the hamper around the frame and snap them to the bottom of the hamper. The flaps should be on the outside of the lower side tubes after assembly. Step 13. Adding the hamper hinges. Align the hinges so that when halfway closed in a V shape, the point of the V is pointing out of the hamper opening. First, from the outside of the frame, between the inside of the hamper, pass a 1/4" by 1 1/4" flathead screw through the hole in the lower hamper frame. Then add the hinge to the end and add a lock nut to the end of the bolt. Use a short handle screwdriver to hold the end of the screw while tightening the nut with a 7/16" socket wrench, but do not over-tighten. Repeat this step on the other side by passing the round top screw from the outside of the frame through the frame and the hole in the end of the hinge. Then add a lock nut to the end and secure in place with a flathead screwdriver and a 7/16" wrench or socket, but do not over-tighten. Step 14. Securing the hinges. Align the hole in the top of the hinge with the hole in the hamper tube, and from the outside, pass another roundhead screw through the tube and the top hole in the hinge, securing in place by adding a lock nut and tightening with a 7/16" wrench and a flathead screwdriver. Then repeat this step on the other side. Pass another roundhead screw through the tube and the top hole in the hinge, securing in place by adding a lock nut and tightening with a 7/16" wrench and a flathead screwdriver. Step 15. Assembling the hamper mounts. Using the hardware in panel 11, pass the hex bolt from the inside through the upper side tube and the spacer and the non-tapered end of the hamper mount. Then add a washer and a nylon lock nut to the end of the bolt. Tighten the nylon nut completely, but keep it loose enough that the hamper mount can still move freely. If the hamper mount is locked, then back the nut off a few threads to free up the motion of the hamper mount. Then repeat this step on the other side by passing the hex bolt from the outside through the upper side tube and adding the spacer and the non-tapered end of the hamper mount to the end of the bolt. Then add a washer and a nylon lock nut to secure the hamper mount in place. Tighten the nylon lock nut completely, but loose enough that the hamper mount can still move freely. Then place the rubber caps over the open back ends of each of the hamper mounts. Step 16. Attaching the hamper. Now slide the hamper mount onto the open end of the tow bars. Pass the small Clevis pin through both pieces and clip the pin with the small hairpin cotter. Repeat this step on the other side, passing the small Clevis pin through both pieces and clipping the pin with the small hairpin cotter. Step 17. Attaching the pull rope. Untie the pull rope from the frame and attach it to the top rear of the frame by tying it in a secure knot. Then attach your lawn sweeper to the towing vehicle and extend the pull rope to the towing vehicle. Allow the pull rope to slacken a little bit and pass the rope through the handle. Then tie knots into the end of the rope to keep the handle in place. Make sure the area of the towing vehicle is clean and pull the adhesive backing off of the hook and loop tape, sticking the handle to the clean area on the back of the vehicle. Now the excess rope can be trimmed with scissors. Congratulations, your Brinly 54-inch sweeper is now assembled. Operational maintenance and tips. Tip 1. Leveling the sweeper. You can adjust the hamper stop by loosening the nuts between the wheels and the hamper using 2 1/2-inch wrench and sockets, and sliding the pivoted hamper stop up or down so the hamper is in an approximately level position. Then retighten the hamper stop bolts after the hamper is level. If the hamper cannot be leveled from here, the clevis may need to be adjusted to a lower hole if the tow tubes are angled too rearward to level with the hamper stop. Tip 2. Using the windscreen. If there is wind when you are sweeping, you will want to close the windscreen by removing the hamper clevis pins, disconnecting the hamper mount tubes, and stretching the elastic straps around the inside of the hamper mount to rest on the spacer before replacing the hamper using the clevis pins and hairpin cotters. Tip 3. To store your Brinly sweeper upright, remove the cotter pins from the hamper tubes and slide the hamper off of the tow bars. Collapse the hamper by folding out the ladder braces and position the brush housing upright with the tow bars pointed upward. The collapsed hamper can either hang on the end of the tow bars or fit behind the tow bars for a minimal footprint in your garage. Tip 4. The dowel pin and drive pinion. Routine lubrication of the dowel pin and drive pinion is recommended twice a year, in the late fall before storage and in the spring before first use. Check the left and right drive pinion gears for wear and tear to replace as needed. Replacement parts, including the left and right drive pinion gears, can be ordered on the Brinly Parts Store online. For questions, call Brinly Customer Service at 1-877-728-8224. Brinly, making things better since 1839.